Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more slug testing, and today we've got another new round that we haven't tried, and it's definitely a little bit interesting as compared to some of the stuff we've tested before, and just by happenstance one of you guys requested to see it a few days ago, and I happened to recently pick it up because I wanted to test it and see what it could do as well. But as for the shell we've got out here today, I brought out some of these. These are some Remington Slugger High Velocity slugs. They are a 12 gauge 2 3/4 inch 7/8 ounce rifled slug, moving about 1800 feet per second. So not quite your typical 1 ounce rifled slug. So I'm definitely curious to see how the 7/8 ounce rifled slug can do. And as for the setup we've got here today to run them through, I brought out this guy. This is my Remington 870 special purpose, but it has an 18.5 inch fully rifled cantilever barrel on it with a loopholed VX1 2-7x28 on top. So yes, those are rifled slugs going through a rifled barrel. You can absolutely do it. It is safe to do it, but doesn't necessarily mean you're going to see any better performance. I say that because I always get a lot of people questioning why even bother running them through a rifled barrel when they're kind of designed for a smoothbore, and simply it's because I want to see what happens through this setup. But it is perfectly safe to do it. It just doesn't mean you're going to see any better results. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what the little bit lighter 7/8 ounce rifled slugs can do through that shorter 18.5 inch barrel. Obviously that's not what that shotgun is zeroed for, but we're shooting for groups today, so we will be just fine. But as for the test, we're going to do it kind of the same as usual. I don't have 1,000 of these slugs out here to shoot a bunch of groups with, so we're going to kind of maximize what we do have, and we'll shoot a group at 50 yards and we'll shoot another group at 100 yards, all of which will be across the chronograph as well, so we can get our velocity. And then we'll bring it back here and measure and look over some velocity numbers and stuff and see what they were actually able to do for us. So enough talking, let's head over here to our targets, start shooting some groups and see what we can get. The top smaller target is going to be our 50-yard point of aim. The larger bottom target is going to be our 100-yard group. So let's head over here and take these shots and just see what we're able to get with the 7/8 ounce sluggers through this 870 with the rifled barrel today. Okay, so let's take a quick look here at our velocity numbers and see what we got. We did have a little bit of jumping around. Obviously, our first shot reading 8,000 and something feet per second, that was clearly an error. So I just went ahead and deleted that shot out of the chronograph. The rest of them were all between high 1200s and low 1600s with what seems about like a high 1400, low 1500 average. So they don't seem to be the most consistent shells, but I don't know, maybe one or two of those could have been just slightly funny readings on the chronograph. Either way, I deleted the 8,000 shot and I'm just going to leave the rest in because I think it's probably within the realm of reason for these slugs through that 18.5 inch barrel. Either way, we can go through the numbers we had here. The last round was 1589, then we had 1348, then we had 1241, then we had 1573 and 1637. So that's a high of 1637 and a low of 1241. So you can see the spread there if those were all correct readings. But that gave us an average of 1477. And with a box claim of 1800, 300 and change feet per second under the box claim out of an 18.5 inch barrel, I think is within reason. We definitely weren't expecting to see the full 1800. So I think that 1500 mark is definitely pretty reasonable. So maybe not the most consistent velocity numbers if the chronograph is reading correctly, but not too terrible overall. So I think we're within reason here as far as velocity numbers go, but I would have liked to seen them a little more consistent. Well, what kind of accuracy did we actually get? Let's go over here and check it out and see what it gave us. Okay, so we're up on the porch today because the lighting outside was really weird with some glares for one reason or another, but we can still see what we need to see. Obviously, that top group up here was our 50-yard group and the bottom one was the 100-yard group. And as you can see, we weren't looking terrible at 50 yards, but we did have one flyer and two touching each other, and we kind of kept a little bit of the same as we moved out to 100 yards. We'll measure it here in a second, but I think it's going to be pretty much the same story. At double the distance, we're going to have double the size group. But just initially, before we measure anything, it's definitely nowhere near as good as what we've seen out of that 870 before. So I don't think it quite met my hopes for what these could be, but let's measure them and see what we got. Okay, so that 50-yard group gave us 2.82 inches, and that is from center of that top hole to center of the bottom hole. So just under that 3-inch mark. Really, that's about the max that I typically like to see, even at 100 yards. So is it a 50-yard slug out of that particular shotgun? Yeah, it'll do you just fine on a deer, but definitely not super impressive. I wish we could have kept them all pretty much touching like those top two, but that's not really the case. So definitely borderline at 50 yards, and we clearly opened it up out at 100. So let's measure that bottom group and see what it gave us. Okay, so that bottom group was a little bit larger than my calipers here, but I did add up the two measurements that I did, and it was 6.1 plus this 1.56. So that came out to about a 7.6-inch group, 7.5 inches or so. Definitely not very impressive. Is it technically still minute of deer? Sure. It would probably still get the job done, but I definitely think it's borderline, and it's not something that I would want to use, that's for sure. So I guess it's definitely a little more disappointing than what I was hoping to see. I don't think I was expecting to see, super tight, same hole type of groups, but I was hoping for that 3 to 4 inch range at 100 yards, but that's clearly not what we got. So this just goes to show, like I said earlier, you can fire rifled slugs through a rifled barrel, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to see good results out of it. Because this one definitely was a little disappointing as for today's results. Alright, y'all. Well, what did you think about those results there? Definitely not what I'm looking for, that's for sure. Out to 50, 60 yards, yeah, sure, you would still be just fine with that 3-inch group or so. But still, we've seen way better out of this particular setup with actually some Remington Sabo slugs. So at the end of the day, this combination was just a little disappointing. But that's why we test things, because some things might really surprise you with how good they are, and other things might really disappoint you at the same time. So that just goes to show why you always test everything you can get your hands on sometimes and see what your setup likes and doesn't like. But as always, leave your thoughts in the comments. Is that about what you expected to see? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested any of the Remington Slugger 7/8 ounce slugs? And if so, what has been your results with them? And would you hunt with that kind of a grouping or not? It's a little bit too big for my liking, but if it's absolutely the only thing you had, then sure, you would have a 50-yard deer setup. So let me know your thoughts down below. But with that being said, I've got plenty more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All that information will be in the description if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.